Right, I think that'll be everybody. Can everybody see the slideshow?
Yeah.
Bro, cool. Right, I'll make a start then. Welcome to session two of our series of webinars discussing the history and impact of the 1965 Race Relations Act. I'll be leading today's session. If you don't know me already, I'm Phil Cherrington. I run the CW's Wales Union Learning Fund project, but I'm also a member of the Education Equalities team. I've worked with FTC on developing this series. And just so you know as well, we are recording this session, so it'll be available afterwards if you want to have a look. So today's session will focus on the Grunwick dispute, which was a pivotal episode in black organising. Occurred about 10 years after the passing of the first Race Relations Act, really marked the beginning of immigrant communities becoming a key part of the trade union movement. So it's a really important episode. It also shows the limits to some degree of trade union solidarity, and is an interesting episode from that perspective as well. Uh, just to recap what FEVSI introduced last week, which was the context of the introduction of the Act. He recounted how empire and the slave trade really fed into patterns of migration into the UK, and then how specific incidents such as the 1963 Bristol bus boycott led to the introduction of the Act and the legal restriction on race discrimination. And Fev's also touched on how further acts in 1968 and 76 went on to strengthen the legislation, for example, by applying it to the workplace. This session will continue those themes, focus on the Grunwick dispute and the significance of it. We'll be focusing on Grunwick dates 1976 to 78. So it shows how things have developed in the 10 years since the introduction of the Act. First thing I'm going to do is just play a video. This is by TUC. It briefly outlines the basics of the dispute. If you just, while you're watching, just think about any bits that seem skipped over or rushed, and then I'll touch on that at the end. Let me know if you can hear the sound as well. All right, bro. So you probably would have noticed that the video skipped over why the strike ended, and for some ways the TUC doesn't come out of this in a great light. I think that's probably why they haven't lingered on that bit. And we'll explore that briefly towards the end of this session. So just to recap, the dispute began in 1976 at the Grunwick Photo Processing Labs in Brent in North London. The majority of the workers were younger women whose families had initially migrated from India to East Africa and then to the UK. So they're mostly British passport holders, and in East Africa, many had enjoyed relatively privileged positions in society. So this again highlights the close links between empire, India and East Africa, obviously parts of the British Empire, and migration into the UK that FEVSI was talking about last week. And those workers weren't guest labourers on temporary visas or anything like that. Many were full British passport holders, which is really crucial in the way they were treated. But at Grunwick, they experienced low pay and often degrading treatment. For example, asked for permission to use a bathroom. And when they did begin to demand the right to join a trade union, the employer refused to recognise and tried to sack them. Another way the legacy of empire played out in the Grunwick dispute was the way the managers treated their staff. So, according to the sociologist and writer Amrit Wilson, who wrote this wonderful book, Finding a Voice, the managers lent into the passive and docile colonial stereotypes of Asian women and made use of the poverty that many of these women found themselves in to avoid paying and treating the workers properly. And so Jebin Desai, who was the leader of the workers, came out as the union leader, said, imagine how humiliating it was for us, particularly older women, to be working and to hear the employer saying to a young English girl, you don't want to come and work here, love. We won't be able to pay the sort of wages that will keep you here, which I think really demonstrates the sexist, racist, colonial attitudes of Grunwick management and some of the attitudes that went through British society at that time. Now, obviously and unfortunately for the Grunwick management, the women didn't conform to this stereotype, as exemplified here by Jabin Desai's famous quote from when she stood up to the manager briefly before the walkout. What you're running here is not a factory, it's a zoo. But in a zoo, there are many types of animals. Some are monkeys who dance on your fingertips, others are lions who can bite your head off. And we are those lions, Mr. Manager. And in that spirit of being aligned, she joined Apex and they walked out from the Grunwick site. Now, once the workers had walked out, they initially gained strong support from the broader trade union movement. Alongside the union, they joined Apex and the TUC. Grunwick workers organised mass pickets in support of the strikers. And at the start of the dispute, the Labour government, which was also supportive of the workers, here we've got Sports Minister Dennis Howell on the left, Shirley Williams, who was Education Secretary, and Fred Mullin, who was Defence Secretary, joining. So a good section of the Labour cabinet were engaged on the picket lines with them at the beginning. This was really significant. It was the first time that unions had given substantial backing, unions and the broader labour movement as well, given substantial backing to a predominantly non-white workforce in a dispute. In previous disputes, there have been previous disputes involving black and Asian workers, for example, in Mansfield Hosiery in 1972 or Imperial Typewriters in 1974. But unions had provided minimal or no support. It's a really excellent article, I've linked it later, by Taj Ali about the Imperial Typewriters dispute. I mean, it's an interesting contrast to how Grunwick was handled, where the movement did eventually rally around people. In line with this, the other unions took solidarity action. For example, here's our predecessor union, the UPW, United Postal Workers, voted to boycott postal services to and from Grunwick. And here's former branch chair Colin Maloney describing the situation.
To me, it was a straightforward situation where you had people that were not getting their union rights, they were underpaid and overworked, and they weren't allowed to go and have prenatal care, postnatal care, no time off. We used to pick the mail up from Grunwick, and we had approached from Mrs. Desai if we would help them by not delivering the mail. The branch agreed that we wouldn't cross the picket line and that we would accept the mail in, but we wouldn't forward it on.
So that's obviously really strong solidarity action there from the posties. Unfortunately, eventually, the Grunwick photo processing plant took legal action. So the employer took legal action, and then that was shut down. And that was really an early example of the state beginning to side with the employer. And you get to see the mechanisms of the state starting to shut this down. However,
to me,
action continued through 1977. Several mass pickets were organised in the summer of 77. On the 22nd of June, an estimated 20,000 people joined in a day of national action, including delegations from trade councils, many CLPs and trade unions. For example, there was a large delegation from the National Union of Mine Workers. And this was met with a really heavy-handed police response, which we've got a couple of images of here. According to Taj Ali, again, over 550 trade unionists were arrested during the lifetime of the dispute, which is an extraordinary number. And also, you can see the scale of support here. And I guess what's significant here is the degree of class solidarity on show. And you see the protesters here, predominantly white, middle-aged men, as trade unions were and still are to some degree. and they've come out in support of these mostly Asian women. So it's a powerful show of like intersectional, but also class-based solidarity, and showed the power of what the trade union movement could be. I think this was particularly powerful, but also particularly concerning for the establishment. So by late 1977, the dispute had become quite damaging to the Labour government, which was, as we may remember, behind in the polls the Thatcher's Tories, and the government commissioned an independent inquiry, which was known as the Scarman Inquiry, to recommend a way forward. Formal pickets were suspended during the inquiry, ensuring that the dispute lost momentum, so we lost having these big mass moments. And at this point, Apex and the TUC decided to withdraw support from the workers who wanted to continue unofficial action. So they essentially, the TUC and the union sided with the government's decision that they were going to just wait on this inquiry to report back. The report eventually recommended that the employer should recognise the union and reinstate the striking workers. However, as it was just a government report, it wasn't backed by any legislation or legal action. It was not legally enforceable, and the employer simply ignored the recommendations. One example of the unofficial action taken in response to the withdrawal of union support was when the striking women mounted a hunger strike outside TUC Congress House in central London on a cold day in 1977 in November. They were immediately suspended by Apex, as the official action was supposed to be suspended during the inquiry period, and they had their strike pay stopped. The TUC's position was unchanged by this, and this led Mrs. Desai, the workers' leader, to say, "Trade union support is like honey on the elbow. You can smell it and you can feel it, but you cannot taste it." And she obviously felt very let down by the withdrawal of trade union support. That's very understandable. Right, okay. So we're going to have a quick look now at some different perspectives on the legacy of the Grumman dispute, and different perspectives on whether it was a defeat or a victory. So I've got three different people who were all at various points on the picket lines or involved in the protests. So we've got, and they come from different perspectives. So we've got Amrit Wilson, the writer, who I had up, whose book I had up earlier. And we've got Dennis Skinner, who was obviously a left-wing Labour MP. And we've got Jaban Desai, who was the leader of the trade unionists on strike. All right. So have a think about who you agree with or what ideas you share. So we'll start with Wilson.
You had an amazing situation developing here. And we've got to ask ourselves, why did the state and the trade union leadership and the owners collaborate in this way? And I think the answer is that there was a potentially revolutionary situation developing.
Right, so Wilson chooses to look at this from a very broad perspective, that, this was a moment which could have fundamentally changed British society, a potentially revolutionary situation which really showed the kind of solidarity between classes, changed the way that things are done. Right, let's hear from Skinner.
Because remember, in these strikes, all the echelons of the state were together, Don't forget that. The police decided they were going to get their own back on one or two people that had been pushing and shoving a little bit too much, and that's when they practiced kettling at Grumwick. I'd never seen it before. I mean, the police did what was asked of them, and there was a right-wing entity to it all. It was like a battle against the Tory party that was now run by Mrs. Thatcher, Sir Keith Joseph, and a lot of other right-wingers that were determined that, given the chance to get power, they were going to smash the trade unions. This was a testing ground, in my opinion.
All right, so Skinner there chooses, sees this through the lens of the Tory government, which followed as a precursor to the tactics that the police would use during the miners' strike or during events such as Orgreave, and sees this as, like he says, as a testing ground for things that would come, and an opportunity for the state to see what it could get away with, basically. Let's hear from Jaban Desai herself, speaking years after the industrial action.
The reason what we were fighting, we have achieved it. The treatment with the staff has already changed. Don't you think it's a victory? That time we were getting 25 pound basic pay, while after this struggle, they are getting 65 pound basic. Don't you think it's a victory?
All right, so Desai herself sees it slightly differently and chooses to emphasise the gains that were made during the dispute. And even though it was a tough dispute, some good things came out of it. Right, so I'll stop sharing. And yeah, just ask the question: did people see this as a defeat or a victory, or what are people's perspectives on Grunwick, or just any further comments that anybody has? Let me know. And I'll bring you in.
Can you hear me, Phil?
I can, Ton, yeah.
Not bad. Just as a quick one on the pay side of it.
Yeah.
25 to 65 pounds seems a nice hefty pay rise. But what about other things like recognising the union going forward and other things such as stopping of the asking to go to toilets and pensions and stuff like that? Where did it go on from there, but not just regarding pay?
They didn't end up recognising the union, and a lot of the people who had been on strike ended up not being reinstated as well. So that there weren't gains in that sense. A lot of the gains were felt by the workers who came afterwards, or people who stayed in the workplace. So it had that downside that a lot of the people who were very heavily engaged ended up not benefiting from it. Which I think was, came from the quote where she was saying about the honey on the elbow, the people, in some ways, the people who put the most in didn't get the benefit from it. So I think that is a complexity to it as well. Thanks, Tom. I feel like that this was really, it was a victory, like Tom said, about the sense that it did improve playing conditions, but it did really reveal the strength that the state could have to shut things down, and a real sense of worry amongst the establishment that if there was going to be a kind of racial class solidarity, the impact that it could have, and it really did begin this idea of reducing trade union rights and shutting down opportunities like this. If you look at what Thatcher government did about taking away the rights for solidarity action, that really, a lot of the things that made this successful were the solidarity action that took place and the ability to hurt the employer that way, and the shows of strength, which were shut down by the Thatcher government, and makes it more difficult for an event like that to happen afterwards. So it's a defeat in that sense, but they did get quite a lot out of it, and there's a lot of publicity around it, and it raised a lot of awareness. So it's a mixed bag in that way. Yeah, go on, Terry.
How have the TUC since reconciled the part that they played in the dispute and their failure to ultimately support the workers towards the end?
Not to my knowledge, but I could look into that and find out afterwards. They're clearly not, in that video they made a few years ago, they're clearly not choosing to emphasize it. Yeah, they're choosing to hide their position in it. I think there were some general secretaries as well who walked past the women when they were on hunger strike. So it's not a classy episode in their history, I don't think. Yeah, go on, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, to go on that point, has things much changed? So we see in unions now, when black and brown people try to get support, trade unions at times find it difficult to understand what race and the perception of race, and our members being discouraged from going to join. We've seen a lot of cases recently, and again, the TUC don't always come out, as they should do. And I know I've got a personal thing with them, but the fact being is that there is no accountability. Surely there's time now that everyone should be held accountable for things that are done then and now. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, clearly some of these issues haven't been resolved, and there are clearly, tensions between different trade unions, between the TUC, and then also relationships with the government as well. These fundamental things haven't necessarily been resolved in this time, and it's easy to see how something similar like this could happen again. Yeah, I agree. Any further comments? All right, if not, then I will leave you to your evenings. But I'll just say before we go that the slides for this session should be circulated in the next few days. There's a list of references on there and further reading if people are interested in knowing more about this topic. There's some really interesting articles on there. There's also a page and a video on the TUC, on the CWU education site with a nice extended video giving some more detail on it. And some more comments by Colin Maloney as well, the former Postie branch chair, who obviously was instrumental involved in the dispute. So thank you very much for your time this evening. Next week, it's Fevzi again. He's back and he will be presenting on the impact of the Equality Act on race and how useful that is and how that can be used in how it has been used and how it can be used in disputes and cases. So thank you all for coming, and I shall see you all next week for next week's session.
Take care all.
Have a nice evening, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.